Hi, in this lesson, we're going to learn about while loops. Sometimes in programming, you need to repeat a task over and over and over and over again. Trying to type out commands time and time again can get boring and it's prone to error. So instead, you can use a loop. There are two main types of loops in programming: while loops, which loop for an indefinite amount of time, and for loops that loop for a defined amount of time. In this lesson, you're going to take a closer look at while loops. A while loop is a control structure that repeats a set of instructions while a condition is true. For example, maybe you add a number to a variable while the variable is below a specified amount. The while loop keeps repeating the instructions until that condition is no longer true. To create a while loop, you use the while keyword followed by the condition. You then put the block of code that you want to execute inside curly brackets. Each time the condition is evaluated, if it is true, the loop body will execute. Here's an example. The variable count is initialized at 0, and then a while loop is set up to loop while count is less than 3. The condition is first evaluated when count is equal to 0, so it's less than 3. The program enters the loop and prints out the value of count. It then increments up and returns to the conditional statement. Count is now equal to 1, which is still less than 3, so the process continues. Count is printed out, and then count is incremented up and returns to the condition. Count is now 2, again less than 3, so we enter the loop one more time, and then it prints out the value. And then after incrementing up, it returns back to the condition statement. Now count is equal to 3, which is no longer less than 3, so the loop is no longer executed, and the program will continue past the loop. One thing to be careful of is creating an infinite loop. An infinite loop is a loop that will always be true and thus continue indefinitely. When this happens, your program often locks up. In this example, the loop is not set up correctly. Notice that count starts at 1, which is greater than 0, and it increments up from there. It'll always be greater than 0, so the program will get stuck printing out count forever. Another important thing to note is that a while loop always finishes the current code block once it starts, even if the condition is no longer true partway through that loop. Let's look at an example of this. In this loop, y starts out at 5, and the condition is to loop while y is greater than or equal to 1. So the condition is true and the program enters the loop. Y is first decreased by 1 and then printed out. The condition reevaluates at y equals 4, and then y is true there, so it decreases to 3 and is printed out again. Next, at y equals 3, the condition evaluates again to be true, so it enters the loop and y is decreased and printed. This process continues. Y is now decreased to 1 and printed. Now y is equal to 1. 1 is still greater than or equal to 1, so we enter the loop. The first step in the loop sets y equal to 0. Even though y is no longer greater than or equal to 1, the loop continues. The condition is not evaluated again until after the loop. So the new value of y, which is now 0, is printed out. Finally, the loop exits because the condition is reevaluated and no longer true. And with that, let's take a look at some examples in the code editor. Okay, so let's take a look at a basic while loop. So this is really just a straight vanilla while loop here, and we'll change it up a little bit. But notice we are just printing our value starting at 1, going up to and equal to 10. We can also add in here, and we'll actually keep the end line, and then after another end line, we will say the end. And we can notice that once our while loop finishes, we get to this line here, and so this line executes after we get to 10. Now if we change this up and say, okay, less than 10, notice that we don't get there. We can also change this here, and again, the idea here is that a while loop continues to execute even once that condition is true. It has to finish the loop before it evaluates it. So we're going to say less than 10, which we can see it ended at 9, but now we're going to see that x actually gets to 10, it still finishes and prints that 10, then it evaluates and comes back, doesn't work. Okay, and we can do different types of things here. We can also do evaluate different pieces. We often will use while loops to check for input, things like that. We can also do multiples inside of the while loop, but this is a basic while loop, and you can go ahead and play around with it on your own.